Hi everyone. Welcome back. We're glad to have you with us today. When Jack discovered his wife's affair with her powerful boss, Jack stayed silent until he found the perfect way to make them both pay. So let's start. I can't count how many times I've heard stories that start like this. Someone thinking their life is perfect until everything crumbles in an instant. That someone was me, Jack Wilson. I was married to an amazing woman, Emily, and together we had a bright, energetic 6-year-old daughter named Chloe. I met Emily during my senior year of college, and she was a junior at the time. Our connection was instant, and within a month of her graduation, we tied the knot. With my engineering degree, I secured a stable position at a national company, while Emily took on a role as a legal assistant in a prestigious law firm. When Chloe was born 2 years later, Emily decided to step away from her career to focus on being a stay-at-home mom, which seemed like the perfect setup for us. Life was smooth and joyful until Chloe started kindergarten. That's when Emily made the decision to return to her previous job at the law firm. In hindsight, the warning signs were there, but I was blind to them. I fully believe that Emily loved me as deeply as I loved her. Looking back, I see how wrong I was. As Emily rejoined the workforce, her wardrobe changed. She began wearing outfits that were far more revealing than before. The once thriving intimacy in our relationship faded away completely. She started staying late at the office, and any time I expressed concern, she brushed me off, claiming that she was working closely with one of the senior partners. She insisted it was a fantastic opportunity, a way to secure our future financially. I tried to believe her, though something didn't sit right. A few months before everything fell apart, I met her boss, Patrick Reed, at the company's Christmas party. From the moment I laid eyes on him, I disliked the man. He seemed arrogant, the kind of person who would look right through you. Throughout the night, I kept an eye on the two of them, but I didn't notice anything overtly inappropriate. Whatever was happening, they were careful to keep it hidden. Yet, deep down, I felt something was off. Everything came crashing down just as Chloe's kindergarten year ended. After her last day of school, she was set to spend the weekend with my parents, giving Emily and me some rare alone time. I'd been excited, hoping to rekindle our relationship over a quiet evening at home with dinner and a movie. But when I walked into the kitchen that evening, I was caught off guard by Emily descending the stairs in a short, elegant dress, her hair perfectly curled, and her makeup immaculate, as though she were heading to some exclusive event. "Wow, you look stunning," I told her, genuinely taken aback. "I wish you'd told me we had plans. I could have rushed home to get ready." "Where are we going?" Her response was like a punch to the gut. She smirked, her expression icy and unfamiliar. "We're not going anywhere," she said bluntly. "I'm going out, but not with you." I froze, struggling to grasp what she had just said. "Wait, what? What do you mean?" She sighed, almost bored. "I have a date," she replied, as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "And this is just the start. Things are going to be different from now on." Before I could react, she added, "My boss is picking me up. I've booked a room downtown, and I won't be home until Sunday." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice trembling with disbelief. "You need to calm down and accept it," she replied, her tone chillingly matter-of-fact. "This is how things are now. I'll come home on Sunday." "Like hell you will," I yelled. "If you leave, don't bother coming back." Emily didn't so much as blink. "No, Jack, I will come back. This is our home, and we're staying married. You can either accept that or leave. And trust me, you don't want to end up broke or in prison. Think about Chloe. She doesn't deserve to lose her dad." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. I stood there, stunned and seething, as she walked to the door. Before I could say another word, the doorbell rang. Emily quickly opened it, letting Patrick into our home. As the front door swung open, Patrick stepped inside with the kind of confidence that only a man used to getting his way could have. His gaze immediately found Emily, and with a smug grin, he asked, "How did he take it?" Emily gave a small shrug, her tone as cool as ice. "Not well," she said calmly. "You'll need to explain what happens if he refuses to cooperate." Patrick didn't come across as intimidating at first glance. He was around my height, maybe a bit shorter, but there was something in his demeanor, a quiet arrogance that made my skin crawl. He turned to me with a self-assured look and said, "Mr. Wilson, we need to have a word." I clenched my fists, my anger barely contained. "A word? The only thing I want is to throw you out of my house." Patrick chuckled, completely unfazed. "You can try, but before you even get close, my driver out there will step in, and trust me, it won't end well for you. By the time the police arrive, you'll be the one sitting in a jail cell." I glanced toward the door, and sure enough, there was a hulking man standing on the porch, arms crossed, watching us like a guard dog. The odds weren't in my favor. Reluctantly, I sat down, muttering a curse under my breath. "Good choice," Patrick said, settling into a chair across from me. His voice oozed with superiority. "Let's keep this civil. Now, here's the deal. When your wife became my personal assistant, she signed on for more than just office duties. We've been seeing each other for 6 months now, and she's tired of sneaking around." I sat there, stunned, as he kept going. "This is how things are going to work from now on," he continued, his words deliberate and cutting. "You and Emily will remain married. You'll still play the husband and father for appearance's sake. The only change is that I'll be the one fulfilling her personal needs." I gritted my teeth, rage boiling inside me. He was speaking as if this arrangement was completely normal, as if I was supposed to nod along and agree. "Most of the time, we'll meet at the office or a hotel," Patrick went on, "but occasionally, when you're not around, we'll use your bedroom." That was the final straw. I jumped to my feet, my voice shaking with anger. "This is insane. There's no way in hell I'm agreeing to this. I'll file for divorce first." Patrick leaned back in his chair, calm as ever. "That's a bad idea, Jack. You're forgetting who I am and what I do for a living. I'm a senior partner at one of the most powerful law firms in the state. If you go down that road, I'll ruin you." I froze. His voice was steady, but every word carried a threat that felt far too real. "If you push for a divorce, you'll lose everything," he said with a cruel smirk. "Your house, your savings, your job gone. You'll still be paying alimony while I enjoy my time with Emily. And let's not forget about Chloe." I stiffened at the mention of my daughter. "You won't see her again," Patrick said, his tone turning even colder. "I'll make sure of it. I know the right people to file false charges. You'll be accused of unspeakable things, the kind of accusations that stick, even if they aren't true. You'll do time in prison, Jack. And even after you get out, you'll never have visitation rights. Your reputation will be destroyed, your friends and family will cut ties, and you'll be completely alone." I sank back into my seat, my body numb. I wanted to shout, to fight back, but I was frozen in place, trapped in this nightmare. Patrick leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I trust you understand now. Don't do anything stupid. If you so much as whisper about this arrangement to anyone, my wife, your friends, anyone, you'll face everything I just described. And if you think you can run, we'll find you." He gave me a twisted smile. "Emily's a fantastic assistant, by the way." Then, with a malicious gleam in his eyes, he leaned in even closer and whispered, "And she gives the best blowjobs." I sat there, too stunned to react as Patrick left the house with Emily by his side. She didn't even glance back at me. Once they were gone, I did the only thing that felt like an escape. I poured myself a drink. And then another. By the time I woke up the next morning, I was alone, hungover, and filled with dread. Emily never came home that Saturday, nor did she show up on Sunday morning. Later that day, I went to pick up Chloe from my parents' house. Seeing her little face light up when she saw me almost broke me. "Where's Mommy?" she asked softly as we drove home. I wanted to tell her the truth, that her mother had betrayed us both. But instead, I forced a fake smile and said, "Mommy had to work." The disappointment on her face cut through me like a knife. I barely managed to hold myself together. Emily finally came home Sunday night. I was already asleep in the guest room by then. Luckily, she didn't come in. I wasn't sure I'd be able to keep my composure if she had. Monday morning, I was up early, helping Chloe get ready for school. Emily came downstairs, focused entirely on our daughter. She barely looked in my direction. As we headed out the door, she gave Chloe a kiss, then turned toward me, as if expecting a goodbye kiss too. I turned away without a word and walked outside. That evening, after Chloe had gone to bed, Emily marched into the basement, my makeshift refuge from the chaos upstairs. "Are we going to have a problem?" she asked, standing with her hands on her hips, ready for a confrontation. I looked up at her, my voice cold and steady. "When you say we, are you referring to me having an issue with you spending the weekend with your boss? Is that the problem you're talking about?" Her expression hardened, and I could see she was bracing for a fight. "Look, Jack, this wasn't something I planned," Emily said, her voice defensive, her arms crossed as if she was trying to shield herself from my rage. "It just happened. It started with coffee in the mornings at work. Patrick liked the creamer I brought from home." I narrowed my eyes, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "I'm sure he did. I bet he couldn't wait to give you some of his special creamer." "Don't be disgusting," she snapped, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Patrick's a persuasive man. You know how I've always said I didn't like sushi? The truth is I'd never even tried it. Patrick convinced me to give it a shot. He told me it was an amazing aphrodisiac." I could feel my stomach turning as she kept talking, her words flowing like a confession she wasn't sorry to make. "The first time I had sushi with him was also the first time we got intimate." She said it so casually, without a trace of genuine regret. "I'm sorry if that hurts you, Jack, but I can't pretend it didn't happen. And, honestly, it was good. He promised me a promotion, his personal assistant. Think about what that means. I'm making way more money now. I'll get to travel with him and meet influential people. It's a good move for us in the long run." She paused, then added almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and Patrick said you could sleep with me again, too, under certain conditions." I blinked, stunned. "God, I can't wait to hear this," I said, sarcasm dripping from every word. Emily didn't even flinch. "He says you can only have sex with me after he's been with me. He wants to make sure his, presence is felt. According to him, that's going to be a regular thing." "Wow," I muttered, shaking my head. "How generous. He's giving me the privilege of sloppy seconds with my own wife. I'm touched." "You can't talk to me like that," Emily snapped, her temper flaring. "This isn't forever, Jack. 2, maybe 3 years. After that, we'll be in a much better position. Financially secure. You just need to ride this out." "You actually believe this, don't you?" I said, incredulous. "You think, after he's done with you, I'm supposed to just pick up the pieces and grow old with you? What happens when your precious Patrick decides he wants a kid with you and expects me to raise it?" Emily's face fell, and for the first time, she avoided my gaze. "Oh no," I said, dread creeping into my voice. "You're not already pregnant, are you?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "But he's brought it up. He wants me to stop taking the pill in a few months. I told him I'd only agree if you were on board first." "I can't believe this," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Get out of my sight, Emily." She lingered for a moment at the top of the stairs, then glanced back at me. "I'll be in our bed waiting. Once I stop the pill, you won't have access anymore. You know the rules." I couldn't hear another word. The idea that she thought I would ever agree to such a twisted plan was beyond me. I grabbed a pillow and a blanket and moved into the guest room. Over the next few days, I started spending more and more time in the basement. It was the only space in the house where I felt like I had any control. Still, for Chloe's sake, I did my best to keep things as normal as possible on the surface. I didn't want her to see how badly everything was falling apart. As the days passed, I knew I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I started digging into Patrick Reed's background, and it didn't take long to realize his reputation for power and ruthlessness wasn't exaggerated. His influence ran deep. He had connections in law enforcement, politics, and the courts. It felt like I was backed into a corner. So I sought out a divorce attorney, hoping for some legal guidance. Her assessment was grim. "Going up against Patrick Reed will destroy you," she said bluntly. "He won't hesitate to fabricate accusations. The kind of charges that stick, even if they're baseless. You'd lose custody of your daughter, your career, your freedom. Divorce isn't a realistic option." That left me with one sliver of hope. The lawyer suggested I gather evidence, something solid to use as leverage. If you can catch them explicitly discussing their plans, it might give you some protection. But even then, it's going to be an uphill battle. I took her advice and bought a voice-activated recorder disguised as a pen. Slipping it into one of Emily's bags felt both desperate and surreal. But it was the only plan I had. Still, I knew I needed to cover my tracks. To avoid leaving a digital trail, I started using the library's public computers to dig deeper. Every crime show I'd ever seen told me that investigators always check a suspect's browser history. I wasn't about to make it easy for them. Hours of searching led me to a desperate, radical idea. Something I never thought I'd consider. 3 hours away, there was a dingy Oriental supply store rumored to sell all sorts of obscure, questionable items. One Saturday, I threw on an old hat, a pair of sunglasses, and my sweats, trying to make myself as unrecognizable as possible before I hit the road. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but desperation makes you do things you never imagined. The store looked exactly like I expected, dusty, dimly lit, and tucked away in a forgotten part of town. As I stepped inside, relief washed over me when I saw it was empty except for an older man behind the counter, eyeing me with curiosity. His gaze lingered a little too long, but I approached him cautiously. In a low voice, I asked, "Do you have tetrodotoxin and dimethylmercury?" The man tilted his head slightly, studying me as if weighing my intentions. Then, a knowing smile crept across his face. "Ah, trouble with the missus?" I forced a faint smile. "Something like that. Do you have what I need?" "I do," he said, his tone casual but businesslike. "But it won't come cheap. $1,500 cash only. I'm assuming you don't want a paper trail." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wad of bills. I'd anticipated the cost and had brought $2,000 with me. Carefully, I counted out $1,500 in 20s and placed the stack on the counter. The old man nodded, disappearing into a back room. A few minutes later, he returned with a small paper bag and placed it in front of me. "Handle these carefully," he instructed, his voice serious now. "A little goes a long way. Use small amounts over time, it'll build up in the body. The effect will be subtle at first, but deadly in the end." He reached into the bag and pulled out 2 syringes. "These will help you administer it. And be careful. Don't let it touch your skin. Best to mix it into something they'll drink." I nodded, grabbed the bag, and left without another word. As I walked to my car, I glanced inside the bag at the 2 vials, one containing tetrodotoxin and the other dimethylmercury. Both were deadly, elusive toxins that would be nearly impossible to trace. Tetrodotoxin comes from pufferfish, a delicacy in some places, but in concentrated form, it's lethal. Dimethylmercury is even deadlier. Just a tiny amount can seep into the body, causing irreversible damage. Both poisons are slow-acting, making the cause of death difficult to pinpoint. A clever person could make it look like food poisoning from bad sushi. And that was the genius of my plan. Emily would unknowingly deliver the poison herself. She kept a stash of her favorite non-dairy creamer at home, taking a bottle to the office whenever she needed to restock. I remembered asking her once why she didn't just keep all of it at work. She'd laughed and said it was her little indulgence, something special she didn't want anyone stealing. Now I knew the truth. That creamer wasn't just for her, it was for Patrick too. I went to the pantry and found the box of creamers, neatly arranged with 11 bottles inside. I carefully took one out, inspecting the cap. It wasn't tamper-proof, but it was sealed with a layer of paper and foil beneath the lid. Perfect. I decided to start with the tetrodotoxin first, since it was less risky to handle. I filled the syringe with the clear liquid, then carefully inserted the needle at the edge of the seal, making sure there was no visible sign of tampering. Slowly, I injected the poison into the creamer bottle and then pulled the needle out. The bottle looked untouched. Reassured, I repeated the process with the remaining 10 bottles, taking my time to ensure I didn't make a mistake. Once I'd finished with the tetrodotoxin, I prepared the dimethylmercury. I was even more cautious with this one. It was so potent that even a few drops on my skin could be fatal. I injected each bottle with care, making sure there were no spills or signs of interference. When I was done, all 11 bottles were ready. 2 weeks passed before I noticed that one of the bottles was gone. The case was down to 10. My stomach twisted with a mix of guilt and resolve. For a moment, I wondered if I'd crossed a line, if I'd gone too far. But those thoughts evaporated quickly when I saw Emily's smug face. That Thursday night, the so-called sushi night came around again. It was the excuse Emily used whenever she and Patrick worked late, though we both knew what it really meant. Chloe and I had dinner alone as usual. I tucked her into bed, kissed her goodnight, and then retreated to the basement to drown my thoughts. Later, Emily came downstairs with that same air of entitlement she'd carried for weeks. "You've got 1 month if you want sex," she declared coldly. "Patrick has decided I'm going off the pill in 4 weeks. After that, you'll have no access." I clenched my fists, anger bubbling to the surface. "Let me get this straight," I said through gritted teeth. "You're offering me a brief window to sleep with my own wife before you start trying to have a kid with your boss? How generous." Emily didn't even flinch. She shrugged casually. "That's the arrangement. And don't use that word. You know how much I hate it." I shook my head, disgusted. "Wasn't the rule that I couldn't touch you unless you were already carrying his filth inside you?" "That's right," she said, smirking. "And don't call it that. I told you I hate that word." "Then I'll pass," I snapped, unable to contain my fury. "I wouldn't touch you whether or not his filth is involved." Emily shrugged again, completely unfazed. "Suit yourself." With that, she turned and walked upstairs, leaving me seething in silence. "I'll be upstairs in our bed," Emily said, her voice laced with smug satisfaction. "It's been a while since we've been intimate." Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel and walked away, her head held high like she was the one in control. As she left, I muttered under my breath, "You wouldn't recognize love if it slapped you in the face." I know people might say I was going too far, that I should have just filed for divorce and walked away. But what they wouldn't understand is the impossible situation I was in. The threats Patrick had made against me, the risk to my daughter, Chloe, and the danger to my own freedom. I wasn't acting out of rage or revenge. It was self-preservation. What I was doing was morally wrong, sure, but I saw no other way to protect what mattered most to me. About a week after I'd prepared the creamer bottles, I noticed that one was missing. The box was down to 9. For a moment, guilt gnawed at me. Had I gone too far? Was this really the right path? But every time I second-guessed myself, Emily's smug face and Patrick's threats shoved those doubts aside. It wasn't until a month later that I started to notice changes in Emily. Her complexion grew noticeably pale, and her hands were what caught my attention the most. At dinner, she would flex her fingers, wringing her hands as though trying to shake off some invisible discomfort. "Everything okay, Emily?" I asked, trying to sound like a concerned husband. She looked at me, her expression uncertain for the first time in weeks. I don't know. My fingers keep going numb, like when your hand falls asleep. It's been happening all week. And I've been feeling short of breath, too." I kept my tone light. "It's probably just stress. Maybe work's getting to you." Her expression hardened, and a sneer flickered across her face. "No, work's great. Everything's going perfectly." 2 weeks later, another bottle of creamer was gone. They must have been drinking a lot of coffee, I thought grimly. But by now, Emily's symptoms had worsened. Her body aches became more frequent, her breathing grew labored, and her skin had taken on an ashen tone that was impossible to ignore. One Thursday evening, Emily came home earlier than usual, which immediately raised my suspicions. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Isn't tonight sushi night?" "I'm not feeling well," she muttered. "Neither is Patrick. We decided to call it an early night." "Poor timing," I said with a smirk. "You two were supposed to start that big project together, weren't you? Hard to deliver on those promises when both of you are too sick to work." Emily shot me a glare and stepped closer, lowering her voice so Chloe wouldn't hear. "Don't be a jerk in front of our daughter." "I'm just pointing out the obvious," I replied with a shrug. "I'm going to lie down after dinner," she said, brushing me off. After dinner, I took Chloe to her room and helped her get ready for bed. As I walked past the master bedroom, I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks. Emily throwing up in the bathroom. I hesitated for a moment before quietly pushing the door open. She was hunched over the toilet, pale and trembling. I kept my voice low, barely above a whisper. "Please tell me you're not already pregnant." She spun her head toward me, her eyes filled with anger. "Screw you, Jack. No. I'm not pregnant. I just went off the pill last week. You could show a little compassion, she added bitterly. I'm really sick. Compassion? I scoffed, crossing my arms. That's rich, coming from you. Her eyes narrowed. I'm still your wife, Jack. You're supposed to show me respect and compassion. I cut her off, my voice cold as steel. No. My wife died the day she started working for that piece of garbage. She was replaced by someone I don't respect and never will. If you're expecting compassion from me, you're wasting your time. I turned and walked out, leaving her hunched over the toilet. I knew I should have felt something, maybe pity or guilt, but I didn't. I felt nothing. The next morning, Emily was still in bed when I left to drop Chloe off at daycare. I should have checked on her, but honestly I didn't care. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Emily. What do you want? I asked, not bothering to hide my irritation. I need you to take me to the hospital, she said weakly. What's wrong? I asked, confused by her tone. I half expected her to complain about feeling sick again. It's not me, she said. It's Patrick. He's had a stroke. For a moment, I was silent. Then, unable to help myself, I let out a short laugh. Are you seriously asking me to take you to the hospital to see your lover? This isn't funny, Jack, she said sharply. They said he could die. I realized it would look suspicious if I refused, so I agreed, taking the rest of the afternoon off work. When I got home, Emily looked awful, pale, shaky, barely able to walk on her own. I helped her into the car, whistling softly as we drove to the hospital. She sat there fuming, muttering insults under her breath, but I didn't care. I enjoyed every second of that drive. When we arrived, we ran into Patrick's wife, Claire, along with one of the firm's senior partners, Derek Carter. Derek took one look at Emily, clearly aware of her affair with Patrick, and quickly pulled her aside. Emily, he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. Do you really think you should be here? His wife is right over there. Ignoring the fact that I was standing right beside her, Emily shot back. I need to know how he's doing. I have to see him. Emily, do you really think you should be here? Derek Carter asked, his voice low but firm. His eyes darted toward Patrick's wife, Claire, standing with his family across the waiting room. His wife is right over there. Emily didn't even glance my way, completely ignoring the fact that I was standing next to her. She locked eyes with Carter. Mr. Carter, I need to know how he's doing. I have to see him. Derek sighed, clearly conflicted, but eventually gave in. Come with me, he said, leading both of us toward the hallway. He kept his voice hushed as we walked. You look awful, Emily. It's not looking good. Patrick's left side is completely paralyzed, and the doctors say his organs are shutting down. They don't know what's causing it, but if they can't figure it out soon, he won't make it through the weekend. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and her voice cracked. Please, Mr. Carter, I need to see him. Can you distract his wife? I'll be quick. Derek hesitated before nodding. He walked over to Claire and the family, while I followed Emily toward Patrick's room. The moment we stepped inside, I stopped at the door, letting her go ahead. Patrick was lying in bed, hooked up to machines, his face pale and twisted in pain. The left side of his face drooped, and although his eyes opened when he saw Emily, he couldn't speak. Emily rushed to his side, grabbing his hand and kissing him on the cheek. I felt my stomach turn as I watched her whisper to him, tears streaming down her face. It made me sick, knowing I was standing there while she clung to the man who had destroyed our family. Emily's sobs grew louder until a nurse walked in. I'm sorry, ma'am, but you need to leave. The nurse gently helped Emily out of the room, leaving just Patrick and me. His eyes widened when he recognized me, and he struggled to form words, but no sound came out. I stepped closer, staring down at the man who had shattered my life. My voice was cold, without a shred of sympathy. Patrick, you're going to die soon. He blinked, trying to respond, but I continued. Before you do, I want you to know something. I didn't take your advice. I didn't accept your disgusting proposal to live under your rules. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to a harsh whisper. And don't worry, I'm going to tell your wife everything you did. She'll know exactly what kind of man you were before you die. Patrick's eyes filled with panic as I stepped back. I did this to you, I said, my tone flat. and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Just then, the machine started beeping frantically. Alarms blared, and nurses rushed into the room, forcing me to step out. I watched as they tried to stabilize him, but I already knew it was pointless. They managed to keep him alive through the weekend, but Patrick Reed died early Monday morning. Emily was a wreck when she heard the news. Her pale complexion had turned even more ashen, and her health was rapidly deteriorating. Despite her frail state, the bitterness in her voice was still there when I got home with Chloe after picking her up from daycare. "I guess you're going to gloat now," Emily said bitterly from the bed. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "No, Emily, I'm not going to gloat." She stared at me, her expression hollow. "You're not even upset he's gone?" I shook my head. "Why would I be? That man destroyed our marriage. He got exactly what he deserved." "Our marriage isn't dead," she whispered, though her voice was weak. I let out a hollow laugh. "You can't seriously believe that." Her lips trembled. "I never stopped loving you, Jack. Nothing I had with Patrick changed that. It was just a way to get ahead, to make sure we were financially secure." I stepped closer, my expression hardening. "No, Emily, our marriage is dead. It died the day you betrayed me. Did you forget I was standing right there? I saw you hug him, kiss him, tell him you loved him, while your husband stood by, watching." Emily broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as I turned to leave. Her cries echoed through the house, but I kept walking. By the end of that week, her condition had worsened significantly. On Friday morning, she could barely get out of bed. Her skin was ghostly pale, her breathing labored. She couldn't even hold down water. I knew I had no choice but to take her to the hospital. The next morning, the doctor met with me in the hallway, his expression grim. "Mr. Wilson, your wife's organs are shutting down. Her blood work shows dangerously high levels of mercury and another toxin commonly found in seafood. Does she eat a lot of sushi?" I fought to keep my face neutral. "Yes, she and her boyfriend have been eating a lot of sushi lately." The doctor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Boyfriend?" I nodded. "I'm sure you're familiar with him. Patrick Reed. He passed away here earlier this week. He and my wife were having an ongoing affair." The doctor's expression shifted to understanding. "That explains a lot. Mr. Reed had a stroke, but many of his symptoms were similar to your wife's. Unfortunately, her condition is critical. Her kidneys failed earlier this morning. It's only a matter of time now." He led me to Emily's room. She was hooked up to multiple machines, her frail body looking far too small for the hospital bed. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths. When she saw me walk in, her eyes brightened just a little. She lifted a trembling hand, gesturing for me to come closer. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Jack, I'm so sorry." I said nothing as I approached her bedside. "I understand now how much I hurt you," she said between shallow breaths. "The doctor told me I don't have much time. I just need to know that you forgive me." I leaned in close, looking her right in the eyes. She managed a weak smile, hopeful. "My dear wife," I began softly, "when we exchanged our vows, I pledged my undying love to you. I promised to be there for you through better or worse, in sickness and in health." Emily's eyes glistened with tears as I continued. "And at the same time," I whispered, "you made a vow. You promised to love and be faithful to me." Her expression faltered. "But you broke those vows," I said coldly. "You belittled me. You humiliated me. You destroyed our family." Her weak smile disappeared, replaced by a look of devastation. "I will never forgive you." A single tear slid down her cheek as I straightened up and turned away, walking out of the room without looking back. Behind me, the machines began to blare as the alarms went off. Less than an hour later, Emily Wilson was pronounced dead. "I hope you and your lover burn in hell," I whispered coldly. I stood there for a moment, watching a single tear slide down Emily's cheek before turning on my heel and walking out of the room. Just as I reached the hallway, I heard the alarms from the machines behind me begin to blare. Less than an hour later, she was gone. Telling Chloe that her mother wasn't coming home was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I cried. For her, not for Emily. My daughter had lost her mom, And no matter how much I resented Emily, I couldn't shield Chloe from that pain. But as for Emily, I had no tears left for her. She tried to destroy me, but in the end, I'd beaten her to it. The doctors chalked up both Emily's and Patrick's deaths to food poisoning, bad sushi. When Emily's body was sent to the funeral home, I was told there would be no autopsy, no investigation. Nobody came knocking on my door with questions. I destroyed every bit of remaining evidence. The extra bottles of poison creamer, the syringes, and the leftover toxins all gone. I even went to Emily's office and retrieved the partially used bottle of creamer she'd taken there. No loose ends. When the funeral home informed me that Emily's parents objected to her cremation on religious grounds, I didn't care. I wanted her body gone, her ashes scattered, along with any lingering trace of what I had done. You'd think I would have felt satisfied with that level of revenge. Emily and Patrick were both gone, and my secret was safe. But it wasn't enough. I wasn't done. The first thing I did was gather all my recordings and make several copies. My first stop? Patrick's widow, Claire Reed. Why confront her now, after he was already dead? I had to know if she'd been complicit, if she knew about the affair and let it happen. Patrick had been far too open about his relationship with Emily for his wife not to have known. When Claire invited me into her home, I casually slipped my pocket recorder on and got straight to the point. Mrs. Reed, I began, I came here to talk to you about your husband and my wife. She raised a hand to stop me before I could say more. You can save your breath, Mr. Wilson. I already know what you're going to say. I leaned back surprised. You knew? She nodded. I did. Patrick wasn't exactly discreet. This wasn't his first affair, you know, but it was his last. I studied her expression, searching for a sign of regret or remorse. There was none. I'm sorry for your loss, she added. But you should know that I've lost my husband too. I kept my voice calm, though my anger simmered beneath the surface. Thank you, Mrs. Reed. But let's be clear. You knew your husband seduced my wife. You knew he turned her against me and our daughter. And you did nothing to stop it. Claire's expression hardened. Now, wait a minute. No. I cut her off sharply. If you'd spoken up, maybe Patrick wouldn't have felt so emboldened. Maybe my daughter would still have a mother. I stood up and grabbed my coat. You knew, Mrs. Reed. That knowledge will help me when I go after Patrick's estate for the pain and suffering he caused my family. Without waiting for a response, I walked out of her house, leaving her in stunned silence. My lawyer had warned me that trying to pursue Patrick's estate was a long shot, especially since he was already dead. But at that point, I didn't care about the odds. I wanted retribution. Along with going after Patrick's estate, I set my sights on the law firm where both Patrick and Emily had worked. My lawyer believed that, with Patrick gone, the firm wouldn't be interested in protecting his reputation and would likely fight back at every turn. But I had an ace up my sleeve, a recording that would change everything. During the months I'd spent planning my revenge, I'd captured a conversation between Patrick, Emily, and one of the senior partners, Derek Carter. On that recording, Derek openly discussed the firm's willingness to back Patrick's arrangement with Emily. He even mentioned connections to law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges, people who owed him favors. Derek made it clear they could ruin me if I didn't play along. My lawyer cautioned that the recording might not hold up in court, but we decided to use it as leverage anyway. We scheduled a meeting with the senior partners of the firm, including Derek Carter. My lawyer didn't disclose the reason for the meeting, hinting only that it involved an insurance issue. We wanted to catch them off guard. When we entered the conference room, all 7 senior partners were already seated. They greeted us politely, their expressions somber, clearly under the impression that we were there to discuss a life insurance policy. Mark Holden, the managing partner, stood up first and offered his condolences. Mr. Wilson, he began, we're deeply sorry for your loss. We understand you've been dealing with some difficulties regarding the insurance payout, and I'm pleased to inform you that we've resolved those issues. He slid a check across the table, $600,000 from the insurance company. I pocketed the check without even glancing at it. Then I looked up and said, "Thank you, Mr. Holden, but that's not why we're here." The room fell silent. I leaned forward, letting my gaze sweep across the faces of each partner. "We're here to give your firm an opportunity to settle a serious matter before we take it public. If we don't reach an agreement, we'll be filing a lawsuit against each of you personally and against the entire firm. The tension in the room was palpable. Every eye shifted to Derek Carter, who suddenly looked very uncomfortable. "You see, Mr. Holden," I began, keeping my voice steady, "your firm wasn't just a passive observer. It was actively complicit in Patrick Reed's plot to lure my wife away from her family and to frame me, to have me arrested, prosecuted, and thrown in jail." Holden's face darkened with anger as he shot up from his chair. "How dare you come in here and accuse this firm of such outrageous crimes? You're tarnishing the reputation of a deceased partner, Mr. Wilson. We won't stand for it." I remained calm, locking eyes with him. "We can leave right now if you'd like," I said. "But I assure you, these allegations, as you call them, are true, and I have the evidence to back them up." I tilted my head toward Derek Carter, who sat rigid in his chair, his face turning pale. "Maybe you should ask Mr. Carter if I'm lying." The entire room shifted its focus to Carter. He squirmed, clearly uncomfortable, and avoided everyone's gaze. No one spoke. They were waiting for him to deny it, but he didn't. My lawyer pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and hit play. The room filled with the sound of Patrick and Derek's voices discussing their scheme. Patrick was laughing about how easy it was to manipulate Emily, while Derek casually mentioned the judges and cops they could use to destroy me if I didn't fall in line. Holden's jaw tightened as he stood up again. He glanced around the room, then turned back to me and my lawyer, his tone more measured this time. "Mr. Wilson, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with my partners privately." "Take your time," I replied, sitting back in my chair. 30 minutes later, Holden returned to the room alone. His face betrayed none of the anger he'd shown earlier. "What are your demands, Mr. Wilson?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. $5 million, I said plainly. "Pay me and my daughter $5 million, or we take this public. The recordings I've shared with you, and many more, will be made public if you refuse." Holden's lips pressed into a thin line. I leaned forward. "My lawyer assures me that Carter will be disbarred. The rest of you could face similar consequences. You mentioned judges and prosecutors on that tape. Imagine the damage to your firm's reputation if that gets out." Holden exhaled slowly. "I'll need time to discuss this with my partners." "You have 2 days," my lawyer interjected. "After that, everything comes out." 2 days later, my lawyer called with news. "They've agreed to your terms," she said. $5 million. Additionally, they'll expel Derek Carter from the firm under a moral clause, stripping him of 90% of his partnership share. They've also asked you to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding Patrick Reed and the firm's involvement. I agreed to the settlement. $5 million was more than enough to ensure Chloe's future was secure. Emily had been right about one thing. Her affair with Patrick had, ironically, secured our financial future. But I didn't feel triumphant. The money didn't erase the betrayal or the pain I'd endured. Once the dust settled, I took a step back from everything. The months of turmoil had consumed my life, but now I had a chance to focus on what truly mattered: my daughter. Chloe was my anchor, my reason to move forward. We traveled together, visiting places she'd always dreamed of seeing. I took her fishing, hiking, and even got back into some of the hobbies I'd abandoned during the dark days of my marriage. Slowly, life began to feel normal again. One day, while grabbing lunch at Chloe's favorite burger joint, I met someone new. Her name was Sarah, a kind, compassionate woman with an air of quiet strength. She worked as a therapist, helping others navigate their own pain and struggles. We clicked immediately, not just because of shared experiences, but because of her ability to see past my scars. Sarah understood me. She didn't push or rush things. Instead, she offered steady support as we navigated our new normal. For the first time in years, I found myself laughing again, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Chloe took to Sarah almost instantly. She was thrilled to see her dad happy, smiling in a way I hadn't for far too long. It didn't take long for the three of us to feel like a family. In time, I learned to forgive. Not because I'd forgotten what Emily and Patrick had done, but because I realized that holding on to the bitterness only chained me to the past. I didn't want to carry that weight anymore. With Sarah by my side, I found peace. I wasn't walking through life alone anymore. I had a second chance at love, happiness, and family. For Chloe, seeing me happy again made all the difference. She grew up surrounded by love, feeling supported and cherished. The cracks in our past hadn't disappeared, but we'd learned to move forward, to heal together. Life wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. We'd built something stronger from the rubble of what had once been, and that made all the difference. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.